Hello, welcome back to the Climbing Nomads YouTube channel. In this episode we're going to be looking at how to choose a bouldering pad. So there are several things to think about when going out for the first time and buying a bouldering pad, and we're going to go through 5 key areas that we think will make a difference when actually choosing a pad. So the first up is surface area, i.e. how big the landing zone is of your actual pad when it's opened up. Because obviously you're no longer indoors, you don't have mats everywhere, you've only got a small slice of mat that you've got to place carefully under your boulder problem. This really is sort of personal preference, so if you're going to be doing maybe shorter boulder problems, you can have a smaller target, but if you're starting to think about doing higher, bigger boulder problems, then maybe consider a larger bouldering pad, and obviously you've got a much larger surface area for when you land from a greater height. The bigger the surface area, the bigger the pad is going to be ultimately, and that's going to have an effect because you're going to have to carry this thing around with you. So going through stiles, going through gates, squeezing between trees and boulders, etc. If you've got a really large pad, it's going to affect your movement. But if you're a giant strapping man, then perhaps a larger pad will be fine. If you're a smaller person like myself, then maybe a smaller pad will be easier to carry. So surface area is probably one of the main factors that I look at when I'm choosing a pad. The second thing is its overall thickness. Obviously, the thicker the pad, the softer the landing. So for instance, the snap pad here, it's quite a whopping depth to this, but it means you get a very nice, soft, cushioned landing, especially when falling from high. When you get sort of slightly thinner pads, you can sort of over time end up bottoming out on it, i.e. when you land, you actually start striking the floor a little bit underneath. So its thickness is quite important. How thick it is might be determined by the type of foam inside it. So all bouldering pads will have a thinner layer of foam on the top portion, which is actually a harder type of foam. So it means that when you come in to land on top of the pad, you hit that foam first. The foam underneath is actually softer. So the combination of having a softer bottom section and a harder, denser foam on top means that any impact is actually distributed across the mat. And hence why you don't always bottom out on all the mats. You land and it distributes the force. So bouldering pads are generally a 2-layered mat, so they'll have soft foam and hard foam. Some pads are actually a 3-layer foam, so they'll have hard, soft and hard again. And those pads you can actually reverse and have them in either orientation. A dual-layered mat will have to be landed on in this plane, for instance with the hard foam on top, soft foam underneath. But if it had a 3-layer system where you had hard, soft, hard, you could have it in the opposite orientation and have it, for instance, semi-perched over a high boulder or a sharp boulder that was in your landing zone with another mat underneath. So mat thickness is quite important, and that'll be dictated as well to a degree by whether you want a dual layer foam or a tri-layered foam. The snap one in particular is quite unique, and it's actually got a slightly different foam cell system inside it. And if you want to know a little bit more about that, we have done an actual full bouldering pad review for the snap guts, so please check that one out to get a bit more information on that unique system. So the third thing to think about is whether you want your mat to be a hinged mat or a taco mat. So hinged mats fold in half, so they've got an actual hinge to them here. And taco mats, when they're open, they don't actually have a hinge at all. They're one complete mat. And there are pros and cons of both of these. So a hinge pad stores folded, so it takes up less space, takes up less room in your garage or your loft or wherever you're keeping it. And it also doesn't stress the foam at the hinge joint itself because it is 2 separate sections of mat, essentially. On the flip side of that, a taco doesn't have a hinge, so it means that you have to store it open. So obviously you can fold it up and carry it around on your bouldering day out, but when you come back home, you should store it open to actually preserve that seam down the middle and not actually form its own crease. So if you store it folded, it'll actually degrade the foam inside a lot faster. And obviously down that center line is obviously where you might be landing dead center in the mat as well. They're very different to look after. So one store's open, one store's folded. I have found with the hinged one that if you haven't quite got it lying flat, when you land on it, it can actually, and has actually, opened up slightly or closed up slightly as you land in the middle of it. So landing on the actual hinge joint itself. And that has actually caused me to bottom out on some mats, on some hinged mats. So that's one of the downsides of hinges, whereas tacos, you don't have that problem because it's all one complete foam mat. You don't actually have that hinge issue, so you shouldn't really be bottoming out unless the foam is degraded. There are companies that are looking to try and alleviate that issue of the hinge opening up. Obviously the thicker the mat is, the less likely it is to fold on you. The Snap one has got Velcro along the hinge itself, so that when you open it up, it velcros together to try and hold it in place so you don't actually have a folding issue. And that's worked very well with that one. So tacos and hinges, there is one other one that we've come across in the past, which is a wedge shape. So I think this one was designed to try and, again, alleviate that whole folding issue when you land on a hinged pad. It has got Velcro down the hinge to try and stop it from folding. And I think the wedge design itself means that because you've got the two layers at an angle, as you land on it, it should actually hold it together as opposed to folding like a hinge. But yeah, that's quite a unique one. The wedge shape is in principle a very good idea. It won't actually fold up on you when you land on it. However, we have found that the layer that's the thin layer in the top portion on this side here, because it's taking all the impact basically, because it's that smaller wedge of foam just sitting on the top there. As you land on it, it means that that's degraded very rapidly. So the wedge ones that we've had haven't lasted very long. In fact, they've lasted a lot less time than a hinged or a taco. Okay, so the fourth thing to think about is the carry system, or the carryability of your mat, because obviously you're going to be picking this thing up, walking around with it, walking in from your car to your crag environment, and probably carrying a load of stuff as well at the same time. All bouldering mats pretty much nowadays come with decent shoulder straps. Some of them will come with waist belts, some might not, and some will come with the ability to remove the shoulder straps entirely. So they'll all have some way of packing up, whether that's buckles or straps, or some sort of closure system where you've got a bit of fabric to wrap around. I think it's worth noting here that sort of the surface area might come into effect here. So if you've got a large pad, which is subsequently also quite heavy, you might want to consider something that's got a decent carry system with a waistband as well, just to take the weight off of your shoulders the whole time and switch it onto your waist. If it's a much lighter pad and you're not imagining carrying a lot of stuff with it, then just shoulder straps is probably fine. Depending on how you want to carry your stuff, because obviously you've got your pad and your bag probably with all your bits and pieces in it, you might decide that carrying it on the shoulders is not the way forward, that you might actually want to carry it over the shoulder instead. So some mats actually have the ability to take out this strap and switch it into more of a over the shoulder carry system instead. Recommend that for very short journeys, for walking. So shoulder straps is one thing to consider. Having a waist belt, a decent waist belt if your mat's going to be heavy or you're going to be carrying a lot of stuff, is another thing to think about. Quite often taco pads come with a piece of fabric that actually the corner slots into, and then clip and buckle everything. I've personally found these to be particularly helpful because it means I can store some stuff inside the mat for the day. So maybe my shoes or the chalk bucket for instance, and because of the fabric, I know that it's not actually going to slide out the bottom without me realising. Whereas with a tacker with just a strap, sometimes I'm worried that things might just drop out the bottom without me realising. One other thing to think about is perhaps where you might be bouldering. If you're likely to be climbing in conditions where it's going to be wet or muddy or just generally quite dirty and grotty, have a think about how you're actually going to carry it back to your car at the end of the day, because once you get it to your nice muddy location, generally speaking, most mats open up with the straps down to the ground, which means that obviously once you land on it, pick it up again to go off, all your straps are nice and muddy. So to deal with that problem, some mats actually turn the other way. So the Moon pad, for instance, turns the other way, and you land on the strap side, and they've got a piece of fabric that covers the strap so you don't get tripped up by those. Other makes also zip up the straps away so that when they do go ground side, they're not actually going to get covered in dirt. So it's just something to think about, is obviously how your straps are you're going to be looking after your boulder problem. Manufacturers come up with many ways of trying to deal with all these little niggles that boulderers have. To combat the sort of the dirt and the slime and the mud, Snap have also put a nice, very tough waterproof fabric on their Snap guts. So it means that if it does get dirty and muddy, you can just wipe it clean before you pick it up. Also, waist strap and shoulder straps are removable, so you can take them out completely if it is particularly bad, before you put it on the ground and actually put them back in your bag somewhere else. So again, these don't have to get dirty and muddy. So the final thing to think about is the price. How much is this mat going to cost you and set you back? And it'll vary, is the short answer, and it's up to you how much you're willing to spend on it. Do bear in mind that with bouldering pads, you get what you pay for. So if you fork out not much money for a pad, it might not be very good quality foam, the materials might not be high quality, and it might not last you very long. So you might be looking at anything from half a year to a year's use. Whereas if you fork out that little bit of extra cash, the materials that are in it, the foam that's in it, is going to last you a little bit longer, and it's likely to be a little bit more robust as well. Overall, spending a bit more money to get a much longer lifetime out of it might be worthwhile in the end. So when it comes to price, very much so, all mats can look pretty similar when you're scrolling through endless pictures of them online, but do bear in mind that if it's got a higher price tag, it probably has got better materials to go with it, and better foam as well. So you're paying for the internal workings of it, you're paying for a higher quality and longevity as well. There's just one thing as well, while you're scrolling through endless internet searches looking for the best bouldering pad, is to also consider out there are also things called a launch pad, a sit pad, or a bit, or something like that. And again, to me this looks pretty similar on an online picture, but in reality it's not. It's much thinner, much smaller, and it's designed to sit on for sit starts, so that you can actually get it underneath a smaller piece of rock, a small overhang for instance, because it's not going to take a huge impact. It might take a little drop back down to earth if you fluff the start move, but it's not meant for high impact force. It's been particularly helpful for putting over like a lump of rock that's been just a little bit too close for comfort in the landing zone, and we'll have the main mat underneath, and then we'll put that to the side so that it covers the rock to prevent a scrape or a knock to the head. So yeah, it has its place, but if you see it and you see a bouldering mat or something that's aired as a small crash pad going for a ridiculously cheap price, just stop for a minute and measure the dimensions, because it could very well be a small launch pad or sit pad instead. Not saying that you have to rush out and buy one of these. We happen to have one and it's proved very useful to us. I'd probably go for a bouldering mat first, and then contemplate this later down the line as an addition, if you've got some spare cash. If you've got any questions, then leave them in the comments below and we'll do our best to answer them. We do have other videos and tutorials, and please do check out the Snap guts review that we did, just to get a bit more information on the actual foam workings of that one. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye!